Nobody talks about the car that embarrassed America's most iconic VE8 muscle cars using an engine that wasn't even supposed to be competitive. No Ferrari badge, no Corvette logo, no Mustang Stampede, just a black Buick with a V6, built by a brand that most people associated with retirement homes and grandparents. And yet, in 1987, this car was the fastest production car in America, faster than a Corvette, faster than a Mustang, faster than almost everything Detroit had to offer. This is the story of the Buick Grand National, the car that nobody expected, the legend that nobody forgot. If this kind of story is what you love, cars that defied logic, broke rules, and rewrote history, hit that like button right now and drop in the comments, what's the most underrated car ever built? We want to know. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what the Grand National became, you need to understand where Buick was in the late 1970s. Buick was not cool. That is the simplest way to say it. While Ford was building Mustangs and Pontiac was pushing the Trans Am, Buick was making comfortable, quiet, smooth automobiles for people who had stopped caring about speed. The brand had prestige, but not excitement. It had refinement, but not fire. Then the oil crisis hit. Emissions regulations tightened, and suddenly, every American automaker was scrambling to downsize engines, cut horsepower, and survive a market that no longer rewarded excess. Performance cars across the board became shadows of themselves. The muscle car era had ended. Everyone accepted that. Everyone except a small group of engineers inside Buick who had a very different idea. Here's what most people don't know. Buick had been quietly developing a turbocharged V6 engine throughout the late 1970s, not for performance. Originally, turbocharging was being explored as a way to extract more efficiency from a smaller engine. It was practical thinking in a practical era. But here's what nobody tells you. When those engineers started pushing the turbocharged V6 harder, really pushing it, the numbers coming back from the dyno were startling. This wasn't an efficiency engine anymore. This was something else entirely. The foundation was a 3.8-liter V6, modest on paper, completely unintimidating by reputation. But with a turbocharger bolted on and the right tuning applied, this engine began producing power figures that made the team look at each other in disbelief. They had stumbled onto something. The Grand National nameplate first appeared in 1982, inspired by Buick's involvement in NASCAR's Grand National Series. The early versions were not particularly impressive. They were the beginning of something, but nobody could see that yet. What happened next changed everything. Through 1984, 1985, and 1986, Buick's engineers kept refining. Each year, the turbocharged V6 grew stronger, more responsive, more brutal in its power delivery. The intercooler was improved. The tuning was sharpened. The suspension was tightened. Slowly, methodically, the Grand National transformed from a stylish cruiser into a genuine performance weapon. And it looked the part too. Murdered out in all black, black body, black trim, black wheels. The Grand National carried a visual aggression that felt almost out of place on a Buick. This wasn't your grandfather's car anymore. This was something darker. Something that announced itself without making a sound. By 1987, the Grand National had reached its final and most devastating form. The turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 was now producing 245 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers sound modest today, but context is everything. In 1987, the Chevrolet Corvette, America's premier sports car, the benchmark of domestic performance, was producing 240 horsepower. The Buick had more. A V6 sedan from a brand known for making comfortable family cars had just outpowered the Corvette. On paper and on the street, the gap was even more pronounced. The Grand National's turbocharged torque delivery was ferocious in a way that normally aspirated engines simply couldn't replicate. From a standing start, the boost built, the turbo spooled, and then the car just launched. Hard, flat, and relentless. Road and Track magazine tested a 1987 Grand National and recorded a 0 to 60 time of 4.9 seconds. The quarter mile in 13.5 seconds. The Corvette ran the same quarter mile in 14.1 seconds. Engineers at Chevrolet weren't just surprised, they were embarrassed. But here's what nobody tells you about those performance numbers. They were almost certainly conservative. Buick, aware of the political sensitivity around a V6 beating a V8 Corvette within the same corporate family, is widely believed to have deliberately understated the Grand National's output. Automotive journalists and independent testers of the era consistently found the car performing well beyond what its official specifications suggested. Some estimates placed the real horsepower figure closer to 270 or even 300. The torque numbers in real-world conditions were described by drivers as shocking, particularly in the mid-range where the turbocharger delivered its power in a sudden, almost violent surge. GM was in an uncomfortable position. One of its own cars was making another of its own cars look slow. Corporate politics inside General Motors were real, and they were tense. And then came the GNX. If the Grand National was a shock, the GNX was a statement. Buick partnered with McLaren Performance Technologies, yes, that McLaren, to create a limited final edition of the Grand National for 1987. Only 547 were built. The GNX took the already formidable turbocharged V6 and pushed it even further. Upgraded turbocharger, revised intercooler, strengthened drivetrain. Official horsepower rating, 276. Real-world estimates closer to 300, possibly more. Car and Driver tested the GNX and recorded a quarter-mile time of 13.43 seconds. Some tests went faster. One widely cited test produced a staggering 12.7-second quarter-mile run. To put that in perspective, a 12.7-second quarter-mile in 1987 was exotic supercar territory. This was a Buick, a front-engine, rear-wheel drive American sedan with a 6-cylinder engine and a turbocharger, crossing the line at over 109 miles per hour. The automotive world didn't know whether to applaud or panic. What makes the Grand National story truly remarkable is not just the performance, it is the timing. This car arrived at a moment when American performance was at its lowest point in decades. The muscle car era was a memory. Enthusiasts had largely given up on Detroit producing anything exciting. The general assumption was that meaningful performance cars were now coming from Europe and Japan. And then, Buick of all brands, walked into that moment and proved everyone wrong. It didn't arrive with a roaring V8. It didn't arrive with a heritage nameplate dripping in nostalgia. It arrived with a turbocharged V6, an all-black exterior, and performance numbers that rewrote the conversation entirely. It was defiant, unexpected, and completely, utterly serious. Production ended after 1987. The Grand National was discontinued, and with it, the GNX. No continuation, no successor that carried the same spirit. The window opened briefly, and then it closed, but the legend only grew from there. Today, clean original Grand Nationals command serious money at auction. GNX examples regularly sell for $100,000 and beyond. Numbers-matching survivors are treated with the same reverence as the most celebrated muscle cars of the 1960s. The car that arrived without expectation and left without ceremony is now considered one of the greatest American performance cars ever produced. Here is what the Buick Grand National really proved. It proved that greatness doesn't always announce itself the way you expect. It doesn't always come with the right badge, the right cylinder count, or the right reputation. Sometimes it comes from a quiet room full of determined engineers who simply refused to accept the limitations everyone else had agreed to live with. A V6 from Buick, in all black, built during the darkest era of American performance. And it beat everything. Not almost everything. Not most things. Everything. That is why the Grand National isn't just a great car. It is a reminder that the most dangerous competitor is always the one nobody sees coming. Which other underrated cars rewrote the rules when nobody was watching? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one.